Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Cyndi Burnett. Cyndi is the director at creativityandeducation.com, which provides a pathway for educators and parents to bring creativity into their homes and classrooms. Cyndi, it's wonderful having you here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. So, Cyndi, for people who don't know about you or your background, can you just give us a brief sort of story of your journey to where you got to where you are now?
Sure. So when I was growing up, I loved dance and theater, and I decided to study theater and dance for my first degree, my bachelor's of fine arts, and moved to New York City, landed a Broadway tour my first day in the city, and went on tour for 6 months. And at the end of the tour, I thought, wow, this is really not what I want to do with my life. Be on a bus or do the same show over and over again, because I didn't think it was creative. And so I went on this search for something to study. And someone said, stop asking what you want to do with your life. What do you want to learn about? And I said, immediately, I want to learn about creativity. And Julia Cameron's book just came out, The Artist's Way. It was 25 years ago. And I said, I wonder if there's some place I can learn about creativity. And it was amazing because I actually found the International Center for Studies in Creativity, which is the oldest degree granting program in creativity in the world. That was in my backyard in Buffalo, New York. And so within 24 hours of me saying creativity, I was sitting in my first graduate course in creativity. And so that was a Master of Science degree. And I received my degree, and upon completing, they asked me to come on and start teaching. So I started teaching undergrads. I got my doctorate in education. I started teaching graduate students, and 2 years ago I went on sabbatical and realized that I didn't really want to be focusing my time on research. I really wanted to focus my time on practical strategies for parents and teachers to help bring creativity into their homes and classrooms. And when I made that decision, I hugged all of my colleagues and said, I want nothing but the best for you, and now I want to pursue something different. And so we launched our website in May. And if you go to the website, creativityandeducation.com, you can pick your pathway. So I want to bring creativity into my home or my elementary school classroom. And then it takes you through a model I developed, which are 5 points to this model that will help bring creativity into your homes and classrooms.
Cyndi, you just broke my heart a little bit when you were talking about how you were doing research into creativity and then decided to let it go. Anyone who knows about me knows I'm all about the research. I think we had one of your former colleagues, Roger Feinstein, on as well, talking about the research at SUNY. But why would you leave something where you're finding out what makes creativity tick? Surely that must be one of the most fascinating things out there.
It really is. And it was fascinating and rich work that I was doing in the research field. What I found frustrating in the research field as an academic is you spend years and years working on a piece of research. And trust me, I'm a huge advocate for research and making sure that things that we do are research-based, and all of the work that I do is research-based. But what was missing for me was the application and being a translator from the research to the application. So for example, Sir Ken Robinson, who everyone knows about, in terms of his TED Talk and bringing, he was a great advocate for bringing creativity into education. And he got people really fired up, which was fantastic. But ultimately, teachers kept coming to me saying, okay, so I believe creativity is important. I see the benefit. So how do I actually do it? Because what was left was, where's that bridge? What are those pieces that I need to bring into my classroom so that I can actually help my students become more creative, that I can nurture my students to be more creative? And so that's the work that I'm primarily doing. And it's really amazing to take research, and I still dabble with research studies And my colleagues who are researchers, there's a lot of people that are involved as contributors into creativityandeducation.com, but there's also teachers, because teachers are in the classroom and they're able to experience those things. So they can take a piece of research and translate it into their classroom and see if it's effective there. And that's something that's really important to me, is finding these research pieces and then going, okay, so how do we mold those into a classroom in a real life scenario with different teachers of different ages and things. So.
And you mentioned there's a program you've developed based on research, and it has 5 aspects that are important for bringing creativity into the classroom. What are those 5 aspects?
So the first point is that you need to understand what creativity is and why it's important. So often when I go and I work with educators on a professional development day, they'll say, well, I'm not really creative. And I'm like, okay, let's just pause here and let's see if you can answer this question. Have you solved a problem in your classroom in the last week that you couldn't Google the answer for? And they would just start laughing, like, of course. I'm like, okay, great. So if you did that and you didn't crawl into a corner and, bring out the lollipops and just suck on a lollipop, then guess what? You're creative, because so much of creativity is based on problem solving. And I think because teachers feel like, well, I'm not artistic, or I can't create crafts, I'm not creative, but there's this whole other side of creativity, which is improving on things that teachers are amazing at. And once they realize that and they understand what creativity is, and that it's not this like chaotic piece, there have been a few workshops I've run with teachers and they're like, well, I don't want my classroom to be chaotic. Well, you can have a controlled classroom and be teaching creativity, or, integrating creativity into your classroom. So understanding why it's important. And I think the thing that I emphasize in that first point around why is it important is, we want our children to be better problem solvers, and we want them to be able to express themselves in unique ways. And that's so much part of our development as human beings, is we are naturally problem solvers, and we naturally like to express ourselves. And usually that's sort of taken away as we go through this structured, standardized testing curriculum and, Common Core, where there's very strict rules and there's one way to do things. So finding ways to explore other ways to do things, I think, is really important. So that's point 1, understanding creativity. The second point is embodying creativity. So as a creative leader in the classroom, it's really essential that teachers model the behaviors they want to see in their students. And you think about that and you say, of course, you don't want your students to say, well, I don't want to take a risk. Like, you have to show them you're taking risks. And, sometimes I'll talk to teachers and they're like, oh, I'm so embarrassed, I messed up this assignment. And I'm like, that's okay. Did you make it a learning point? Like, see, even Mrs. Smith's fails sometimes, and that's okay. That we have to take risks. So point 2 is all about modeling those behaviors and embodying the creative person. Point 3 is about supporting an environment for creativity, and that's around psychological safety and trust and openness, and creating an environment that is novel and useful, where students feel safe in coming up with new ideas. Point 4 is integrating creativity into the classroom, and I actually have a book that I've compiled with a group of hundreds of educators I've worked with over the years, which are all ideas on how you can integrate different creative thinking skills into any content area. Because like swimming, when you say, well, I'm a good swimmer, which, by the way, I'm a terrible swimmer, but if I was a good swimmer, it wouldn't be just about I get in the pool and I swim. There's all these different aspects of being a good swimmer. You have to be able to kick your legs. You have to be able to turn. You have to be able to hold your breath. You have to be able to kick your legs really hard. There are different strokes. And the same is true with being a creative person, that it's not just about, well, I want my students to be a creative person. It's about having them be more curious. It's about them having them generate original responses to things. It's about having them generate lots of ideas. It's having them look at things in different perspectives. So there's all these different skills, and I use a skill set that there's 20 different skills that help you become a more creative person. So that's number 4. And number 5 is to actually teach for creativity. So actually deliberately teaching creativity and creative problem solving into your classroom.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. So maybe if we take them sort of step by step, I'd just like to get your perspective on some of the understanding I have about creativity as it's taught at school.
Sure.
And one thing I've learned from my previous discussions on people who study how creative people, how creative people are, like
Hmm.
Dr. Kim, who I had on a while back, is that over the last 30 years or so, in the US at least, there's been a general downward trajectory as to the creative performance scores of children at school. Do you have a perspective on that? Do you agree with it? What do you think might be going on there?
I think it depends. I think it depends on what aspect of creativity you're looking at. And, you know, and I think it depends on where you're looking and what schools you're looking at, because some schools are doing it really well. And other schools, when I go into schools, they want nothing to do with creativity. They want to stick, to the scripts. So you look at teachers who have been in college for 6 years here in the United States, and they're teaching in their classrooms and they're reading from scripts. And I think, that's not being, there's no flexibility in terms of going off course or going into a different direction or even steering off the script, right? And I think that can be detrimental to students, because sometimes when students' curiosity the light bulb goes off in a student's mind, and there's this opportunity to go explore something, we don't have the time and space to do that. And that's really where that supportive environment comes from. So I think, I would say it depends. Do I think creativity is going down? It definitely depends on where you're looking.
I think her research specifically was suggesting that the environment in a lot of schools is moving
Mhm.
more and more towards giving the right answers in tests. And
Yes, the
that
standardized tests.
seems to be at the detriment of children's ability to think creatively themselves.
Mhm. Yes, and that's unfortunate. Now, how long ago did you have her on your
I think
show?
this was probably about 2 years ago or so.
Okay. I'm
Um,
trying to I'm trying to remember when that study was. I can't remember. It's been at least 5 or 6 years.
okay, I think that it was a consolidation of Torrance tests.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know exactly where it was, but it was a couple of 100,000
Yeah.
students. So either way, that's one topic that I always like to get people's perspectives on. A second one is other research which suggests that teachers often say that they want creative children, but if you actually give them the archetypes of how creative children behave in a classroom, all of a sudden that's their nightmare,
Mhm.
where children are constantly asking questions and getting sort of off topic and maybe doing things that aren't in the schedule. How do you think that actually influences how teachers go about their job, and whether or not it helps them teach creativity, or whether or not in the back of their mind they just prefer it to not be an issue at all?
Well, I think it depends on the teacher and how skilled the teacher is at, changing course, because we want our students to be more creative. We want them to take risks, but we want them to take appropriate risks. So Teresa Mobley talks a lot about the word appropriate in the definition of creativity, and that's something I really focus on when I work with teachers. And James Kaufman and Ron Baguetta wrote an article about being Superman, and they said most of the time we want our students to be Clark Kent, and sometimes we want them to be Superman. So teaching our students when it's appropriate to be creative and when it's not is a really important piece. So I wrote about the story in one of my books, which is My Sandwich is a Spaceship, Creative Thinking for Parents with Young Children. And my experience in dealing with young children who are so naturally curious, and how do you manage that appropriateness with their creativity? So
I think there's a lot to be said about encouraging it, making it psychologically safe for children to be able to experience that. Um, but you also mentioned something about what's important from the teacher's perspective. So do you think if some teachers feel that they are creative or that they're not creative, that has an impact on where they see creativity to be appropriate in the classroom? Is it just in the arts? Is it in all subjects? Is it in math? Is it in physics? What's your view on where creativity should be taught in schools?
Oh, it should be taught everywhere, in my opinion, because creativity is transdisciplinary. So if you're teaching kids about creative thinking skills, and I'm looking specifically at thinking skills, and some people call them competencies, some people call them traits or behaviors. But if you're looking at something like curiosity, if you're reading a book with a child and you're really focused on like getting them to ask questions, then that's going to transfer into getting them to ask questions in math and science and history. If you're in a history class and you're teaching a group of middle schoolers and you're saying, okay, I want you to look at every different perspective of this particular situation, then they're going to transfer that ability into other subject areas. I was working with the school here in Buffalo, and I go into the school, Elmwood Franklin, and we do this idea project every year. And I teach them about divergent thinking. And so I got in and we generated hundreds of ideas and hundreds of questions to all these different things that we were playing around with. And the French teacher came up to me the first year and she's like, I don't know what you're doing with them, but what they just did in my class blew me away, because, you know, they were coming up with all these ideas and they didn't stop at just the first few. And she's like, what were you doing with them in class? And I was like, well, I was teaching them divergent thinking. And she's like, the results are just incredible. I just can't believe it transferred over. But, you know, that's part of building that skill set.
I think a lot of people do suffer from the art bias, though, and especially
Yes.
if they're asked to help their children be creative, then a lot of people seem unsure of their ability to do that because they see themselves as not being creative either.
Yes. And it's interesting that you say that, because we just launched a questionnaire survey to find out what book has influenced people's creativity the most. Can you think of the book that's influenced your creativity the most?
Mine, well, I read a lot of very scientific studies, but from my perspective, I'd probably say Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Good book, good book. It was about intuition, wasn't it?
About unconscious biases predominantly.
Yes, that was a great book. So we've probably had about 250 responses in the last day or so. And a lot of people are saying The Artist Way, which came out 25 years ago. And you know, and it bothers me only in that it's an arts bias because it has an arts perspective. But there are elements of that book that I think resonate with different people because it's about facing the fear and vulnerability. And I find that now in a much more rich way with Brene Brown's work. And so her books around Daring Greatly and Dare to Lead, Gifts of Imperfection, they all focus on that aspect, which is the book that has helped me the most in living a creative life. Because, you know, sort of letting down that guard of I have to be this, or I have to do more, I have to be more, I have to experience more, and just being enough is something that I think really helped me be a more creative person. But that arts biases definitely comes into play. And I think it's hard for some people who are not at all artistic or inclined to be artistic or interested in the arts to grasp onto how they might benefit from being creative.
So we're coming up to the end of the interview. I want to end the discussion on potentially a very controversial note. I want to get your view on: is it better to educate 100 children to be 1% more creative, or to focus a lot of effort on maybe 2 or 3 children in a school and to really get every last ounce of potential out of them?
Can it be a yes and?
Perfect answer. Both, of course.
You know, it's interesting, the idea of gifted education and creativity. You know, when I do find teachers that come to me and say, I really want to bring creativity into the classroom, it's typically the gifted educators who want to bring it into their classroom. And I think there's an exclamation mark there. I think our gifted children need something special. And I've worked with gifted children, and I see this need for challenge, and that need for challenge is sparked when they have some sort of problem to solve. But I also think that all children could use problem solving capabilities, because that's what life is. You know, we are, you know, one problem after another. That's sort of how you live your life. It's like you live your life and then you stumble on something and then you have to figure out the answer. So finding an answer through a quick Google search is great, but what if you can't do that? And so often we don't have that capability to just do a Google search. I mean, especially right now, we're in the middle of this pandemic. There's so much ambiguity and uncertainty and complexity. And opinions, and you're trying to navigate that with problem solving, and you're trying to listen to yourself, and you're trying to listen to the facts, and you're trying to put all these pieces together to make sense of it. And I think every person needs to have that ability and that skill to be able to do that in the 21st century.
Couldn't agree more. Wonderful note to end on. Cyndi, it's been wonderful having you here. If people want to find out more about you and your work, what's the best place they can go to find out more?
So the best place is just thecreativityandeducation.com.
Perfect. I'll make sure to get that link down in the description below. Cyndi, it's been wonderful having you here, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders, and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they are backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.